Welcome back. You are listening to Nate the Hate on YouTube, iTunes, and Spotify. Be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you have not already. And with that, I'd like to welcome in my co-host, Modern Vintage Gamer.
Is this thing on, Nate? Are we back?
We are back after a fairly long hiatus, and I do apologize to everyone in the community, but when you become ill and you need a long period to recoup, you unfortunately do have to take a break for a considerable amount of time. But I have healed up, I am feeling better, and we are ready to produce more consistent content as we do come towards the conclusion of 2024. And we have this episode. We will also have an episode talking about the Game Awards and some of our predictions before the Game Awards take place. So that episode will be up early next week. And then from there, we will lean into 2025. And I do want to touch on 2025, actually, and the future of the channel, as there's a lot I'm going to evaluate in the coming weeks as we do approach the new year, because this year didn't go as well as I think either of us wanted the year to go in terms of content output. And there's a variety of reasons of why we weren't able to produce the content that we did want to do over the course of the year, be it both personal and for professional reasons. And that's going to change in 2025. I want to make that commitment here and now that come 2025, I want us to go back to what we were doing in 2020 and 2021 with weekly shows. There will be some stretches of time where maybe we miss a week here or there due to industry events or, maybe a vacation, things along those lines. But otherwise, I want us to have output of 45, 50 episodes in 2025, if not more, as we confront and discuss more topics. We analyze and go in depth on more topics and really deliver to the community more consistent quality content. And there are ideas being explored right now of how I want to better connect with the community through the channel. And that's something that we will get into early next year, not in this episode, as I still want to evaluate and consider and weigh the pros and cons of doing so. But I definitely want to be held accountable by the community and just create more quality content for everyone to consume and enjoy. So 2024 was a rough year, a lot of obstacles, but we've overcome them, and it's going to lead into a stronger, bigger, better year for content from the channel in the new year.
Yeah, and I'm obviously 100% on board with this as well. And I do think next year is going to be a bigger year. There's going to be a lot happening next year, as we know. There's talk about new hardware coming out, which we're going to talk about today. And look, I think 2025 is going to be just business as usual. So I'm looking forward to it. I know, just to kind of touch on what you said, this year was all over the place. There was periods of time where nothing really interesting was happening from a news perspective. There was also periods of time where I was not available. I was on vacation. You got sick. Just everything that you could imagine happened kind of did happen. But I am glad that we're going to close out the year with a couple more episodes here and really kind of just get us in 2025. I'm looking forward to it.
Yes, that's the thing with 2025, be it new hardware, a lot of new exciting games. There's going to be a lot to talk about, but it's also going to be a year where I want to go into exploring a lot of unique, original ideas. And those are things that we did a lot in 2020 and 2021, where we had industry guests come on to discuss their perspective of a particular issue. And that's something I definitely want to capitalize on further in 2025, of just creating and hosting conversations that you're not going to find anywhere else. That maybe it's a topic no one else wants to address, be it out of fear or maybe just lack of information. And I want to go out and find individuals who are well-versed on these topics and bring them to the community and have that conversation. Because I think that's something that we really shined with a couple of years ago that, unfortunately, due to scheduling and just conflicts and such, that's been more difficult to really arrange. But that's a pledge I want to make in 2025, that we do go that path and we create more and more original, unique content beyond what many have come to expect from the channels, be it predictions, reactions, and just general conversation on news topics and happenings of the industry. Just going that extra step to really create and deliver something that you're not going to find anywhere else with a unique voice and take that no other channel can give you.
All right, Nate. So one more piece of housekeeping before we jump in to our topic. What's happening with the live stream? I know people are going to ask about it. I know there's been some questions about it. We did hit the 25,000 subscriber goal. So thank you to everyone for making that happen. So when are we doing this live stream, and what can we let people know what we're doing about it?
I think right now, as I'm looking at the month, we have the episode this week. We have the Game Awards next week. We will have our predictions episode that week. I'm thinking we can try to schedule the live stream the week before Christmas, so the week following the Game Awards.
Yeah, I think that will work. Let's put a pin in that, and we will announce something via Nate the Hate's social media when we lock in the time. But I think that should be fine.
Yeah, we have to figure out an exact day and time to do the live stream, but we do have a variety of games and such for giveaways. So definitely going to be giving back to the community this holiday season to show you a lot of thanks and support, and for supporting the channel throughout 2024, or even if you've been here since the start of the channel. So that's something we will be working on. We just have to schedule and figure out when works best in these final weeks of the year, but it will happen before the conclusion of 2024. So stay tuned for additional information on the live stream. And with that, we go into the first topic of the episode, and it's going to be about the Nintendo Switch. Not the Switch 2, but just the Nintendo Switch, and how it's still thriving in 2024 and looks to continue that trend moving into 2025, because throughout 2024, even up to now, Nintendo continues to make new announcements for game releases on this now aging platform. We have Donkey Kong coming out in January. Just a few weeks ago, Nintendo announced that Xenoblade Chronicles X will be coming to Switch in March of 2025. And it's very clear that Nintendo is not pausing on software releases for the Switch just because the Switch 2 is just beyond the horizon. Nintendo wants to continue to support the Switch with meaningful software even after the introduction of the Switch 2 is done. And when you look back at some of the prior Nintendo generations, you could definitely pinpoint a moment in time where you could tell Nintendo had shifted priority to new hardware. You look at the GameCube, outside of Twilight Princess, really in that final year, you could tell Nintendo's focus at that point was to the Wii. And then with the Wii, you could tell they were beginning to really move away from that platform to prioritize the Wii U. And the Wii U, you may not be able to pinpoint an exact moment when Nintendo shifted away from that hardware because it felt as though it was near immediate in just the first 2 years or so. But even with their handheld line, you could always tell when Nintendo was making a move. And for the last couple of years, a lot of conversation and speculation with the Switch release lineup has been people saying, oh, Nintendo hasn't dated games and they should have detailed something. And that was an indication of, oh, Switch 2 has to be looming just over the edge. And each year, Nintendo has surprised and put those types of speculation kind of in their place, where people say, oh, this year is going to be slow. Here's a new 2D Zelda game. Oh, this year's slow. Here's a 2D Mario game. They've continued to exceed expectation with new releases. But with 2025, they're starting the year off with some quality. And I think that quality is really going to follow throughout 2025 because we still have Metroid Prime 4. That game needs a release date, and it's also a big release for the platform. Got the first look at it just last summer, and now it's just a question of when will we see it again? There's been a lot of rumor, and there's also just the expectation in general that Nintendo will host their annual February Direct. Whether it's a partner direct or a general direct remains unknown, but naturally Nintendo is going to communicate in some form early next year of what their intents are with the Switch platform. Now, with that, we have to wonder, when will Metroid Prime 4 release? Is that a first half release, or is it something that will come out closer to the holiday? I think a lot of speculation and expectation of Switch fans is that it would come out sometime in the first half of the year, because you would think the holiday would primarily focus on Switch 2 releases. Do you agree with that, or do you think Metroid Prime 4 could really fall wherever Nintendo wants it to be?
I think it's probably a first half of the year type of deal. Maybe it's over the summer that we potentially could see it, Nate. It's very hard to really lock in what the expectation would be for something like Metroid Prime 4, simply because it's just been around for such a long time. There's been so many years have passed, and we said to ourselves, this is the year. Well, we know the year is next year. Now it's a matter of trying to predict when it's coming. I think there's reasons why you could say it's probably coming before the first half, or in the first half of the year. There's also some reasons why it could be coming in the latter part of the year. Maybe it is a September, October type game that could slot into that spot. But of course, that does imply that Nintendo also has the Switch 2, and they're ramping up whatever they're doing with that at that point. So if I'm going to predict, Nate, you're probably right. It's most likely a first half of the year thing. Maybe in April, May, could be a June type thing, but probably either Q1 or Q2 for me.
Yeah, I mean, Metroid Prime 4, I think, is going to be viewed in a lot of ways as finally the swan song to the Switch.
Right.
I think in a lot of ways, 2025 is going to be the final year that we get meaningful Switch support from Nintendo. Even with backwards compatibility and such, Nintendo is going to want to move away from the Switch at some point and not prioritize it when it comes to their flagship IPs and releases. You don't want to be held back by Switch hardware when you are now prioritizing Switch 2, which, based on the leaks and such, does show a substantial leap in performance and visual, fidelity range and such. So Metroid Prime 4 definitely feels as though this is that swan song. This is going to be the last huge release for it. You're not going to get a 3D Mario game on the current Switch. That's something that should have been prioritized on new hardware. Naturally, you're not going to get a new Zelda game or anything of that caliber moving forward. But what you can see is a lot of smaller games, like we're seeing with the Donkey Kong Country Returns remaster from Forever Entertainment releasing early next year with Xenoblade Chronicles X. These are quality games that, if you didn't own a Wii U or a Wii, you never had a chance to play these games. And now is a good opportunity to have a chance to visit them and enjoy them. And this leads me into giving folks a holiday treat. A game that's one of my personal favorites will be coming to the Nintendo Switch in 2025. And that title is Kirby Planet Robobot.
Ooh, that's a great game.
It's a fantastic game, one of the best 3DS games to ever release. And it's that type of title that I think Nintendo can continue to kind of use as filler for the Switch in 2025, just to give people quality, give them games to purchase. And whether they play it on their Switch or their Switch 2, it doesn't really matter. They want people to continue to buy games on the platform as a whole. And as you release these games in the lead up to Metroid Prime 4, you allow Switch owners to feel satisfied that, yes, new hardware is looming, but I'm still getting quality games. And you're going to have some third-party games mixed in here and there. I believe there were some rumors earlier this year suggesting Nintendo was going to third-party companies and trying to court them to port games to the Switch to fill in their release lineup a bit. I don't know how much truth there are to those rumors, but if there is truth to it, an interesting strategy. I would be very curious to see what type of, software game and games they were able to secure to fill this lineup. But it's definitely becoming very clear that the Switch is finally, we've said this several times, but it's finally preparing to have its,
Hmm.
just to close its eyes and enjoy a nice long slumber.
Have you heard anything about Link Between Worlds? Because that would be a game that I would like to see on the Switch.
I've never heard that one mentioned,
Damn.
but it is, I mean, that's a fantastic game.
Yeah.
It would look really good in HD, but unfortunately, that's not one I've ever heard. But maybe Nintendo has another surprise in store for Switch owners next year, and we can see Link Between Worlds become a reality.
That would be cool.
And it's definitely, I mean, there has been that expectation of maybe Kid Icarus HD happens. That's been circulating around for a while, but the only game I can say with certainty right now is Kirby Planet Robobot.
Well, I will look forward to that because that's definitely a good one. So I can't wait to get my hands on that. That'll be a good get for next year.
And one thing I think Nintendo is definitely very conscious about, especially with the Switch, is that they don't want to have a repeat of what happened with the 3DS and the Switch, where they were releasing some really quality exclusive games on the 3DS. But because the Switch couldn't play 3DS games, there was a significant lull in sales. So when you put Samus Returns on the 3DS, everyone was saying, why couldn't I get a nice 2D Metroid game on my Switch? Why did you put this on the 3DS after the Switch came out? And, Nintendo wanted to support the 3DS. You also had games coming out in 2018, I believe even 2019 in some cases, where it felt as though Nintendo wanted to support that fan base for as long as they could with some lower quality releases. I think with the Switch to Switch 2, they're going to give us 2025. Maybe we see some Switch games in 2026. Again, smaller tier games. But I think within that 12-month period or so, like we're definitely in the final days.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we're going to see long-term support for the Switch. Like these are this is the closing days approaching. 2025 is going to kind of be its retirement tour. And given the way we're seeing overall hardware sales of the Switch really decline worldwide quite rapidly, I wonder how long production of the Switch is actually going to remain active after the introduction of the Switch 2, because we are going to see or learn about Nintendo's fiscal forecast for the Switch, in May of next year. But given that they had to reduce the current fiscal year by 1 million units, it means sales slowed down more than even they were anticipating. And you kind of have to wonder if maybe they're going to go into next fiscal year saying we're only going to forecast 7, 8 million units. And after that, we're going to cease production because it's been going on for a while. I mean, this is going to be going into its 8th year on the market. How long will production lines really remain active before they do finally just say, that's it? I kind of feel as though the coming fiscal year will be the final fiscal year of production for the Switch. And wherever the final figure hits is going to be the final sales figure for the Switch. And I know a lot of people are invested in, will the Switch pass the PS2? And we finally had the official figure of the PS2, 160.6 million units.
All of a sudden, it seems unattainable, doesn't it? But here's the thing, Nate. If we go back and listen to, we've talked about this before, this topic, and I think I definitely said, and I don't remember if you did, you may have, but I always felt like the Switch wouldn't quite make it. And that was before the revised number of 160. I was going off was it 155 was kind of the number before the 160?
Yes.
Even the 155, I felt like may just be difficult, to get to. But hey, look, it really depends, like I think next year, Nintendo is really pushing hard to keep people invested in the Switch ecosystem and to generate more sales and to offer, maybe there's one last limited edition, collector's edition, whatever you call, variant that comes out next year. It's possible that they give it, one last push to try to get as much as they can. But I do agree that I feel like maybe there's one more fiscal year left after next year where, they continue to make these systems and then they just kind of close up shop, if you will. Because it's very hard to see anything beyond that. But, it's also very interesting. I feel like the first direct of next year may really open up, what we think is going to happen with the Switch in 2025 and beyond. Maybe that's what we'd really need to kind of wait for. Because I kind of felt like Tears of the Kingdom for me, and going back, clearly I got it wrong, but I always felt like Tears of the Kingdom was the swan song for the Switch, and it's been a little bit of time since then. We've seen a lot more games come out since then. So I think, look, the first half of next year looks pretty solid for Nintendo as far as the Switch goes. So I do think that February Direct is really going to show us what their plan is for the Switch, whether it's more of a slow tapering off type of deal, or if it's we're just turning the tap off right now here and disconnecting the hose because we've only got one more year left after this and we're done. But what do you think? I mean, 2025 is going to be one of the most interesting years for a while for many reasons. But I think what Nintendo is going to do with the Switch is kind of really interesting to think about, because they've always had a little bit of that, I don't want to say struggles with the transitioning, but they've always had just a couple stumbles here and there. And I think this time round, it feels like they've shored up a lot of things for 2025.
Yeah, I mean, 2025 for Nintendo and the Switch is definitely going to be a year of interest to watch just in general. And this would be something we will discuss in January with just our Nintendo 2025 predictions. But with the Switch itself, what makes it very challenging is that Nintendo has this tendency to sit on finished games for a long period of time.
Right.
And when you sit on a game for 6 months, 8 months, or a year, it really creates this challenge of predicting what could they release in 2025 outside of Donkey Kong, Xenoblade Chronicles, Kirby Planet Robobot, and Metroid Prime 4. What other games has Nintendo gone through lot check and testing, localization, that are just sitting on the shelf waiting for Nintendo to pluck them and say, okay, you're coming out in September of next year on the Switch? It's hard to say.
Yeah.
And that's where a direct early next year will definitely shed a lot of light on where the Switch is going to be positioned. Could we see a price drop on the hardware of $50 to $100, depending on the model? That would definitely spark some new interest in the platform, not necessarily from new buyers, but from those who maybe at this point are saying, I'd like to upgrade my OLED or my launch Switch, but I don't want to give you $250 or $350 for a system. You give it a price reduction where I'm spending $150 or $200 or $300 even, or maybe you go down to $99 on a Switch Lite. You might go out and just buy an extra or a secondary one because the price is now cheaper.
Yeah.
So a price cut could do wonders for them if they decide to go that path. But I do think this coming fiscal year will be kind of that last for the Switch. I don't see them continuing to give us a forecast going into 2027.
Unlikely. I would say they're closed up shop by then. I'd be very surprised.
It'd be 10 years of production if they go that far.
Yeah.
Which they could do, but I think it would be at a very reduced rate. They're not going to be making 10 million Switches because honestly, you also have to factor in.
I think at that point, the only things they're really offering on the Switch would be NSO updates. Because I think that's something they'll continue to provide. Even even with the Switch 2, I'm assuming
Right.
NSO is just going to work on Switch 2. There's no reason why that wouldn't be the case, right? So I think the only things I would probably think that Nintendo would give us beyond, end of next fiscal would be NSO updates, which they could do for a long time and can continue to do that if they wanted to.
I guess with NSO updates, they would do really up until they just run out of games for those platforms that are on the current Switch. So as long as you're getting Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, N64, NES and Super NES, and Genesis games, which is already once in a blue moon, that you would get those on the base Switch forever. As long as that's getting an update in any way, you would always get those on the Switch. In terms of retail releases, it's just going to be smaller stuff. And I think that largely will wrap up in 2026. But yeah, we definitely have to wait and see what the first Direct will bring us and see what Nintendo communicates in terms of planning for software, because Metroid Prime 4 definitely has that feel of this is going to be that last major release, regardless of it's a cross-gen release or not. It's still releasing on the Switch. And then if you have a lot of smaller stuff come out after it, be it games in the vein of Kirby Planet Robobot, or let's just say hypothetically a Kid Icarus HD, those are all fine, because going into the next topic, with the Switch 2 now having confirmed backwards compatibility, by supporting the Switch with some of those games, it's also encouraging to Switch 2 buyers that you can buy this game. You can play this on the Switch 2. And when Nintendo officially confirmed backwards compatibility, they did make a very curious mention of how they need to detail the backwards compatibility features and such further at a later time, which suggests to me that something about this backwards compatibility maybe is going to go a little further than just basic backwards compatibility, because if it's basic backwards compatibility, what is there to detail?
That's a great question. I feel like, Nate, Furukawa mentioned backward compatibility, and I'm just being I'm putting my sales hat on for a moment. I feel like Furukawa mentioned backward compatibility simply because the Switch still is their main focus right now, and they want to remind people that if you buy these games and tie them to your Nintendo account today, you're not going to lose them on the next hardware. So buy your Switch games. We still want as many Switch sales as we can. So I feel like that's why he made the announcement when he did. And I think the second part, will have more to detail. What potentially would that mean? It could mean anything, really. It could mean maybe there are some limitations or restrictions, or maybe there are some enhancements that these games will get, or maybe a combination of both. It's really hard to say. Maybe the service has some specifics about it that need to be detailed in more detail. But I think you're right. I don't think it's just a matter of, something that they have that just, will work out of the box. I feel like there's going to be some way that this thing works. And this goes back to the video that I made, 3 years ago now, I think it was. It was a long time ago, where I talked about the different ways they could solve for backward compatibility and what way that would be. I think basically it's going to answer that question for us, how they approach this. Because one of the things that I saw from the backward compatibility post from Furukawa was some people were saying, well, does this mean physical games will work, or is this digital games just tied to a Nintendo account? So all those questions I feel like will be answered. And I mean, it seems like to me, I don't know what you got from that tweet when he said we'll have more to announce later. It sounds like they're going to at least give us something as far as some type of information about how this all works, right? Rather than just a bullet point on a list of features that the new hardware has.
Yeah, to my understanding, the backwards compatibility is full backwards compatibility. So it
Mhm.
would be digital and physical.
Right.
Um, yeah, I guess the big question is just whether or not are we going to get enhancements with the games? Are there going to be enhancements in select few cases? Are enhancements something that it's up to the discretion of the developer and publisher? And maybe that's something that they plan to detail. I mean, obviously, there could be some exclusions in backwards compatibility, like Labo.
Yes.
Maybe that isn't compatible because the system itself will be bigger, so it's not going to fit in the mold. Or maybe the Joy Cons are thicker and longer, so it's not going to fit in the Ring Fit Adventure ring. Things like that could be something that they want to detail of these are the games that will not work. But overall, to my understanding, it is full backwards compatibility. And I am curious if we are going to see those enhancements because one of the things that would definitely motivate me to buy Switch games in 2025, let's use a Metroid Prime 4 just as a loose example. And for this example, assume it is not a cross gen release. If I am to buy that game and I'm going to play it on my Switch 2, I want it to have enhancements.
Of course.
I
Yeah.
want it to look better on this new hardware than it would look on my standard Switch
Right.
because I'm now playing on a substantially more powerful piece of hardware.
Mhm.
If it just looks like a Switch game, I'd kind of be looking at it saying, great, I can play it on my Switch too, but it looks dated. It looks like an older game. And when you look at what Microsoft has done with backwards compatibility, I'm not expecting Nintendo to go that far. I'm not expecting auto HDR and FPS boost and a resolution boost just by default. I'm expecting something more in line with what Sony has done with the
Right.
PS4 games on PS5, where you can get very specific enhancements
Yeah.
when you're playing it on the Switch 2. And I think that would be fine. I do feel as though they have to offer some form of enhancement just through the backwards compatibility. I'm not talking about cross-gen patches like Sony did, where pay $10 and you get the PS5 SKU
Mhm.
of your PS4 game, because that's definitely, or it could definitely be an avenue Nintendo explores with Switch to Switch 2 games, where a publisher says, we've made a native Switch 2 version of the game, but to upgrade it, you have to pay 10, 15, $20 or whatever they want to charge, and you just get that now on your Switch 2 without having to go to the store and buying the native Switch 2 cartridge. So those are two different things. And maybe Nintendo wants to detail all of those possibilities of how games are going to function. But that's going to be a very big answer to give when the time comes, because I think backwards compatibility has become a very important feature for all of these console manufacturers, especially in the digital age. And we did make a video on this. I believe it was either earlier this year or last year, of how important backwards compatibility is in the digital environment, where you collect or you have accumulated a vast catalog of software and you want the software to come with you. And now, as it's coming with you to more powerful hardware, you want to see enhancements. You don't want it to look exactly how you remember, where it looks, low resolution and stuff. You want it to look a little better. You want it to look a little cleaner. And ideally, Nintendo is able to deliver on that front a very, I don't want to even use the term enhanced, but just an improved version of a Switch game. Because I think that will lead people to go back to some Switch games and purchase them if they do play better on the Switch too, be it titles like Hyrule Warriors, Age of Calamity, a game that ran abysmal on the Switch, or even titles like Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and 3. If it can clean up the image a little bit, I think you'd have a lot of people have interest, or Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal. We've seen what they've done on overclock switches, and
Yeah.
because the dynamic resolution is in place, that in theory, when it's being played on more powerful hardware, we could get a cleaner image.
Absolutely. I think the way that I kind of see this going would be, you're right. I feel like they're going to treat it more along the lines of what Sony is doing. I don't think you're right. I don't think that they would have enhancements of what Xbox is doing with their backward compatibility. But I would kind of expect to see just a organic game boost kind of just kick in, where it's like, well, you're running this on a faster processor, so we're going to give you some of that power. Maybe you don't get the entire, performance of the new SoC, but you get some of it, right? And that would be good enough. Like you said, you've seen overclocking tests. I've done overclocking tests on many, many games. You've seen the organic boosts that you get just by pushing memory clocks and CPU clocks and GPU clocks higher. Even a 15%, 20% overclock on all three of those cores is enough to make a game like Age of Calamity not chug. It can hold its 30 FPS cap, right? So maybe that's really all that's needed, for the Back-Compat stuff. And anything else, we'll call a selection of games that are specifically enhanced to look and run better, are basically just patches. Now, whether Nintendo, goes back and charges money for those, I couldn't say. It may be something that they offer up as a service on NSO, for example. I don't know how they would approach it, but I think there's kind of three tiers of this, Nate. I think there's the base stuff where it just gets an organic boost because there's a new SoC that's powering this. There is specific targeted patches to enhance specific games. And I think there's also just the, hey, we're going to just natively recompile this old Switch game and make it a Switch 2 release with enhancements. I think that's also something that they would look at.
Yeah, so a lot of possibilities for Nintendo to potentially detail when it comes to backwards compatibility. But it was nice that they did come out. They did confirm backwards compatibility is there, and I agree with your reasoning that it was to say to the consumer, buy Switch games this holiday season. Don't be afraid of buying Switch games this holiday just because new hardware is coming. Buy the games. You can enjoy them on the next system. So proceed, enjoy, entertain yourselves this year, and buy whatever you like, because we will still be here being able to play those games next year. And it's also not even just to the consumer, but also to retailers and wholesalers and partners of order more Switch games, because people are going to buy these games next year, even after the Switch 2 comes out. So that's kind of their messaging of keep buying the games, keep ordering games. We're going to ship them to you. So it was kind of a beacon to everybody of keep buying our games. Now, I want to talk about the rollout of information Nintendo has done regarding the Switch 2 this fiscal year, dating back to May, when they put out their very general, broad statement of new hardware is coming. We will share more information on it this fiscal year. Now, that's how they began the fiscal year. You then fast forward to the 6-month earnings report, and they confirm backwards compatibility. Now, at basically every point of this fiscal year, Nintendo has acknowledged the Switch 2 in some fashion. The next time Nintendo will speak to investors will be early 2025 at the 9-month investor briefing. The 9-month investor briefing should take place second half of January, maybe early February. Nintendo has not updated their investor relations calendar at this time, but they should in the coming weeks. Once we know that specific timing, that is where a lot of people right now are anticipating the Switch 2 to be revealed, is somewhere around January to February. And I think a lot of it is dependent on when the 9-month investor briefing takes place. Based on the history of them acknowledging the Switch 2 right around the time or directly on the date that they have their investor briefings, kind of lends a little credibility and credence to the idea of come January, early February, will we see the Switch 2 finally be revealed this fiscal year?
I think so. I think that was kind of where my head was at when I was thinking about this. And you do recall, Nate, we had Kat Bailey on maybe a few months ago now, and we were both kind of spitballing, windows of time. I think back then I said maybe March of 2025, but I think February kind of fits better for me around that time frame. I think once we get into next year, then there's really no reason why they really need to hold back, unless there is some things going on behind the scenes that we don't really don't understand, or we're not sure about, as far as are the games ready to go. But I don't know. Like I feel like I always suggested, and I felt like that this year was never going to be something that Nintendo was interested in talking about or announcing. And when I say this year, I mean this calendar year. And it was always going to be next calendar year, but before the end of the fiscal. So look, January, February could easily be a time where they announce their plans. So I think that fits for me. Get this year out of the way, get the holiday out of the way, and then you kind of jump into 2025, and you've got business to do. You've got a roadmap of things that you need to get done, and I think it starts early. So I would say so.
Yeah, I think a lot of expectation and speculation is definitely going to end up circling around that 9-month investor meeting timing, be it January or February of next year. And it's going to lead to daily, if not weekly, rumors and speculative videos of people saying, is this the week? And then it's going to be followed up week after week until it finally happens. Whereas you should just maybe embrace the basic principle of between January 1st and the conclusion of March, the Switch 2 will be revealed. You don't have to obsess over which week it's going to be. It's going to happen within that time span because it has to happen. This is a self-imposed deadline Nintendo has put on themselves. And when you go back to one of the conversations we had earlier this year about the reveal timing, it was like going back to maybe an October reveal if the hardware were to release in the first or like the early portion of next year. And that it was going to replicate what they did with the Switch. Reveal in October, big event in January, launch in March. October came and went. We got an Alarmo announcement.
We did.
But one thing that we did discuss, even when Kat Bailey was on back in September, was that if Nintendo wanted to announce it this calendar year, it felt as though that they would have communicated that back in May. They specifically used the terminology this fiscal year because that was their intent. It was just going to be this fiscal year. And when you look at Nintendo's history, when they use that type of verbiage, they tend to go towards the latter half of a time frame that they communicate. So if in May they say, we're going to give you news before the conclusion of this fiscal year, it tends to reason that they are talking, we're not going to talk again on this for another 9 months.
Yes.
If not more. We're not going to communicate it in the next 2 to 3 months, because if we were, we probably would have said that.
Yeah, I mean, they're throwing a nugget out, to investors to kind of marinate over. Like it's some information that they can basically then take away, and when, like you said, 9 months or so goes by, then it's time to talk about it. I never felt like it was, we're going to announce it this fiscal, and then 3 months later, an announcement comes. It was always, you're right, it's always something that is towards the tail end of that time duration. And it's really just to satisfy investors at the end of the day and make sure that they're in the loop of what's happening.
So now as we approach this 9-month earning report within the next, month plus, that's where everyone's going to be focused. Say, okay, is this going to be that timing? And I think if I had to place a bet, I'd probably go, 51% favorability in it being around the 9-month window. I don't think they're going to wait until March to do the reveal. I think come to 9 months, you're going to have very anxious investors saying, okay, we're getting towards the end of this fiscal year.
Right.
Start to communicate with us. And I think that just seems as though it has favorable odds. It definitely could be later.
Oh, absolutely.
It definitely just comes down to when Nintendo wants to begin that marketing blitz. And
Right.
as we've seen from various reports of shipping data with components and SoC shippings to various plants and manufacturers in Vietnam and other regions in Asia, there's a lot of units getting prepped. So mass production, if it has not yet begun, it is on the verge of beginning. And we also have reports that Nintendo could potentially be prepping a substantial amount of systems to curb scalping when the system does release. So it's a question of if they're beginning, let's say, mass production, if it began in December, or if they're intending it to begin in January. That then feeds and fuels the idea that an announcement is happening, a reveal is happening in January. You also, just this week, you had some accessories potentially be leaked on websites. Now, some of these accessories, sometimes these companies can jump the gun. There's also the possibility of some of these companies made a fake product. It's hard to know. I don't know if anyone found out who the accessory manufacturer is of these particular products that leaked. I think that remained unknown.
That logo looked a little sketchy, Nate. That Switch 2 logo.
It looked placeholder.
It really did. It really did.
It didn't look right.
It did.
But I mean, those are the types of things that, yeah, certain things are definitely going to be entering production. It's nearing. And when you have 800,000 NVIDIA SoCs being delivered to production lines, it means something is going to be happening soon. It's just a question of, has it already happened? And if it has happened, it's surprising Nintendo hasn't revealed it. Or is the production imminent, where it could be early next year it begins, and January is that time frame, and a couple of weeks later the reveal takes place. Because when you look at the history of how Nintendo has revealed and announced their hardware, it's always right around the time mass production has begun.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Switch Lite was announced right around the time mass production had begun. The Switch itself, right around the time mass production had begun. So it would stand to reason that it's going to play out again. It's just a question of when exactly is it going to happen? Because when you look at the components and all the bits and pieces being shipped and hundreds of thousands of units, and that information is 2 months delayed. So it's not at this moment. You kind of wonder, okay, if they already have that many units at the end of September, start of October, and they didn't announce the system yet, kind of begin to come to some form of, I guess, coping of, okay, maybe it hasn't entered mass production yet, but it should be very soon. And that's where, coming into 2025, I know I personally am not going to sit here and obsess over, is this the week? It's going to happen in a 12-week span.
Yep.
And I'm just going to let it happen.
Right. I mean, if it's not January, it's going to be February. If it's not February, it's March. It's really,
That's it.
Yeah. That's it.
Like, unless Nintendo comes out in the 9-month investor meeting and says, we're delaying the announcement of the Switch successor, we will communicate further details at a later day, then that's cause of concern. Like, you gave yourself a self-imposed deadline that you're now missing. Then there's reason for concern. But otherwise, there's no reason to obsess over. It's going to happen when it happens, no matter what. And I think the 9-month investor briefing, it has very favorable odds, because otherwise investors are going to have questions of, hey, the fiscal year ends in the next 6 weeks.
Right.
And then even then, Nintendo can say, yeah, we have an announcement coming in the next 6 weeks. Stay calm.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I don't know what else for Furukawa, what nuggets he could throw out to investors to keep him satisfied. I mean, talking about the Back-Compat stuff, talking about the launch window timing, that's all great for this year, but I don't really feel like he can say anything else or throw any more little nuggets out early next year. I think it's really, we need to know what's happening with the system.
Yeah. And you also have to factor in that you have GDC in March. You have DICE as well early next year. You have CES.
Yeah.
these are kind of venues where accessory makers and developers, there's going to be a lot of industry conversation again, just like it was earlier this year. So you want to get ahead of some of this and just make it official. So right now, my expectation is that second half of January, early February for the console reveal, which once that happens, it then leads us to when is it going to release? And this did have a rumor kind of sprout up this week where a report from, I believe it's Nintendo, which was then translated by Game Reactor, reported that their sources have indicated to them that the Switch 2 will potentially release in the month of June. Now, this kind of conflicts with some rumors that people have been, I guess, reporting over the last several weeks, if not a month, of it coming out in March. And what I can say on this topic is that as of late September, early October, there's been a lot of industry chatter around the release window of the Switch 2. And that release window in this chatter has been late May to June. So the information that Game Reactor translated from Nintendo, based on the chatter that I have heard, appears to be accurate. Now, there's still plenty of uncertainty around it. This is just industry chatter. Industry chatter is not chiseled in stone. This is not gospel. This is just what partners and companies have as their internal expectations. That is the time frame that they have penciled in for their games, is late May, early June for the Switch 2's release. Will that play out exactly? Maybe. One piece of information I do have that these reports did not is that I have heard Nintendo is preparing and planning to host an event in May that will be focused on Switch 2. The nature of this event, I do not have specifics on at this moment. If I had to wager a guess, I would say it would be similar to what Nintendo did in January of 2017, where they would be able to invite media, maybe even have a public hands-on demonstration, and that this event will just be that opportunity to have hands-on demos, allow people to touch, play, and experience the Switch 2. And if you look at that May event and then extrapolate time and say, okay, let's say it is replicating what they did in 2017 with the January to March launch. It kind of fits the idea of a June launch. Then you have to factor in the possibilities of you have Summer Games Fest in June. That would grant partners and Nintendo to have hands-on demos at a major summer event. You also have PAX East taking place in May, a fine convention and venue to have the Switch 2 playable to people who maybe can't attend this event in question, depending on its location. You have PAX East in Boston, tens of thousands of gamers there. Nice hands-on, possibility for everyone there.
The thing that they did with the original Switch, that was like a road show, if I recall correctly. They kind of took it around the country.
Yes. Mm-hmm. They went to very specific locations, like major metro type cities, where it was there for like a day or two.
I remember.
And, like they had it in like Japan, they did it in Europe as well. Europe also had a very significant media event.
Yep.
And I believe it was in London. So that might be what this May event is going to be. It could be something where each respective region has their own thing. And that's kind of what leads me to believe that the June information does have a lot of validity to it. Mm-hmm. That with this May event, June makes a lot of sense. It does. One consensus is it's going to be in that second half of Nintendo's Q1, which would be May to June, because Nintendo's Q1 begins in April. But again, this is a fluid industry.
Yeah. I mean, look, at the end of the day, Nate, I just want to see this new system come out. That's all I.
Right.
You're right. Every week there's always new information we hear about, or new leaks, or new whatever it is, speculations.
Mhm.
I think it's just time now. I just want this thing to come out.
I mean, from the production side, some of the chatter I've heard is that Nintendo indeed does want to have anywhere from 6 to 8 million systems ready for their launch period.
Yeah.
Which again goes to what you're seeing now from the components and such being shipped around. That if they were to begin production, let's say it began this month, or even if it is January, if you want to have 6 million systems ready, June starts to make more sense. And I think at this point, you did have the reports come out earlier this year that Nintendo would not make this fiscal year for a launch. And you had people saying, oh, maybe it would come out at April, the earliest. So I don't think a Nintendo Q1 launch is really shocking news to anybody. And I am by no means saying this is some grand revelation. This is just what industry chatter has been over the last 2 to 3 months of late May to June. And I think that's been in line with some expectations of a lot of people as the year has progressed with no announcement and such, that people began to kind of embrace the idea of maybe they do come out in May, June of next year. And people will say, oh, a summer launch, that hasn't happened before. The Nintendo 64 launched in June in Japan.
That's right.
So it can happen. And I think the timing just makes a lot of sense for Nintendo to do so with so many industry events taking place. It's just a prime opportunity for them to put demos from partners in the hands of people. Because partners, be it Square Enix, Ubisoft, Capcom, whomever, if you can have a hands-on demo at Summer Games Fest, regardless of Nintendo being there or not, that's a great opportunity for you, especially if your game is in that launch window.
Definitely right. And I don't think summer really makes a difference at this point. I think the system is guaranteed to sell extremely well out of the gate, no matter when, really. So if it's summer, if it's fall, spring, whatever, it's gonna move units. But positioning it, for that time frame makes a lot of sense to me. Hopefully it comes out. Hopefully we see it at that point. But man, I just want this thing to come out.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully the industry chatter about May to June is accurate, and that is when the system comes out. And it's just when you pair it in with the components and everything and the production lines either being active or soon to be active, the industry chatter of a May event, it just feels as though things are aligning very nicely. But we'll find out early next year if that is indeed the launch window. Right now, it appears to be the case.
So here's a hypothetical for you. Let's say they reveal the system in March, which is, we both kind of feel like that's probably not going to happen. But let's say it does. Does that change your vibe for a summer release, or does it kind of adjust things a little bit? Do you think there's still enough time for a summer release if they basically just announce this thing on the last day of the fiscal year?
It complicates things a little bit.
Yeah.
I think if they were to announce it the final day of March, so the latest point they could possibly do, you still, let's say the May event still happens as planned. Nothing is delayed, nothing changes there.
Right.
I think the only thing that would change for me is that you now have to entertain, maybe now it's a July or an August launch instead. I think that's the only thing that would change, is you just really move it back a month or so.
Yeah.
But I mean, I would also want to look at what the components and such are happening. What type of volume are we seeing these pieces move in? Because if we're still seeing hundreds of thousands of pieces move, you kind of have to sit to say, okay, Nintendo is now stockpiling millions of screens and SoCs, and they haven't started production, which would be very baffling because you can only stock so much.
Right. I don't think they want to be in that situation. I think you're right. Now, once mass production has begun, that's when they need to start moving into phase 2, as quickly as they can, really. I think, yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think March is going to happen. I think it's going to be a little bit earlier than that. And your timeline sounds good. You know, it all fits quite nicely. But man, as we saw, like, you know, things can happen. You know, I think the other interesting thing is what does this direct look like early next year? Now we know that this direct is probably not going to have anything about the new system. I don't think it's going to reveal the new system. I think the reveal is going to be separate. Would you agree with that, right?
Yeah, I don't think the first direct of the year would be any Switch 2 content.
So the question is, what's the order of operations here? Do we get the direct first and then the reveal? Or do you get the reveal, then the direct?
They could play it out similar to what we had in May, where they acknowledge the Switch 2, and then they announce, hey, we have a direct coming.
Yeah.
Won't be any Switch 2 at it. They could do something like that. It just falls, it's dependent on when Nintendo's 9-month investor briefing takes place. And whether it is towards the end of January or if it's the first few weeks, like the opening days of February, it just comes down to when will it be scheduled. Because typically the first direct is usually around Valentine's Day if Nintendo follows tradition.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's hard to say on that front, but Nintendo could easily reveal it and then just say, yeah, we have a direct coming up in the next couple of weeks. There'll be no Switch 2 content added.
Yeah.
We have Switch 2 event coming April or May, and, something like that. Because how did they announce the January event for the Switch? Was that following the October trailer? Was it immediately following or was it later in the year? I don't recall.
I don't recall either, but I want to say, I have to look. I want to say it was immediately following.
So they could do something similar in that vein here, depending on how the rollout is. But, I mean, when I saw the report hit of the June report of rumor earlier this week, I was kind of like, okay, that's interesting that someone else is hearing information similar to me. And like, I'm not endorsing the article. I am just sharing what I have heard. I'm not saying, yeah, they're 100% right in their report. It's just that is industry chatter dating back to late September of that time frame of May to June. Now, I want to emphasize that before this ends up on Reddit or wherever, and My Nintendo and such. Yep. So that's the timeline that I've been hearing. We'll see how accurate the timeline and roadmap play out. Sometime early next year, we'll see once Nintendo reveals it. But with that, we go to some Streamlabs questions. And our first one comes from Baron, who donated $1. Hello, Nate. Hello, MVG. What color option would you like for the console to have? Keep up the good work, fellas.
Is he talking about the Switch 2?
I would assume yes.
What color options? I mean, I don't know. I don't really care. I'm not the right person to ask, but I think with anything Nintendo, there's going to be some type of unique branding and unique style about it, and maybe a different color palette is used to describe what the system will be and what it looks like. I think maybe a different shade of red, which isn't the Switch red, maybe something a little bit different to indicate that it's in the same family, but it's something different. Beyond that, I don't know. Just a regular looking system, a black one, with gray Joy-Cons. I'm happy with that. Just give me that, or maybe a white one. I like the OLED look, so that's always a nice one. But what do you think?
I mean, for the system itself, I'm expecting, just a black tablet. Joy-Cons, I mean, based on the leaks and such, they appear to be white, which I'm fine with. Nice, clean aesthetic. I really don't focus too much on the color of a system unless it's just a hideous color that upsets me. But, I'm fine with black system, white Joy-Cons, or vice versa. I don't mind. I don't really pay much stock or attention to it. Then had a $10 donation from Big Boss X. With Zelda Echo of Wisdom out on a Thursday, and the next two big Nintendo first-party games out on Thursday, Mario Party and Mario and Luigi, is Nintendo moving away from a Friday release schedule?
Well, I mean, in some ways you could say they are because that's exactly what they've done. But I don't know. Like, I'm not really sure why they would move these games to a Thursday rather than a Friday. There's probably some reason why they've done that. Maybe, Nate, you have some more insight onto that, but I don't think they're specifically moving away from it. I think there's maybe some reasons internally why they felt like they needed to do it. Maybe there's some analytical data suggesting that more people spend money on a Thursday and buy games, or maybe they just want to give a little bit more time for people to start getting into the game and then enjoy the weekend to, maybe wrap the game up or something. I couldn't say.
My first thought is with games now being worldwide launches, that they're doing Thursday in like North America because it's Friday in Australia and New Zealand and Japan.
Yeah.
So instead of doing a staggered release of saying, okay, it's Friday in Japan, but now you have to wait in North America 18 hours, that they just say, okay, it's midnight in New Zealand, so now it's Friday. So, you know what, we're just going to release it that way. I was thinking maybe that is the reason behind it. And it just makes it simpler. But that's what I would say. I mean, I remember when games used to come out on Tuesday.
Yeah. Remember Mortal Monday when the Mortal Kombat games came out on Mortal Monday? And then I think Xbox did Tuesday games and XBLA every Tuesday, and Virtual Console was dropping games on Tuesdays.
Was Virtual Console Tuesday or Wednesday?
I think it was Wednesday.
Yeah.
Virtual Console.
Because, the Wii Virtual Console, if you weren't there, it was an event.
That's right. It was.
You looked forward to a specific time every Wednesday to go see if the eShop had, or the Wii Virtual Console store had updated.
And it usually did.
And you got greeted with the music. And that was something to look forward to every week of like, what new games are we getting this week? Now you get new games every day.
Yeah.
Entitled Youth.
Yep.
Spoiled. We can't go on a Zoomer rant. Then had a $1 donation from Liam Warner. Do you ever see us getting any sort of openable re-release, whether it be a port, eShop download, or remaster remake of The Legend of Zelda Minish Cap or Four Swords Adventure?
I'm going to say yes to both because I'd like to will both of those into the universe. So yeah.
Well, I can't argue with that. Then had a $1 donation from Liam Warner. If the next Switch has a 1080p screen, do you think Switch 1 games will run at 1080p by default, or would that need a patch? Do you think other TV enhancements, such as Bowser's Fury and 60 FPS instead of 30, would also apply patches in handheld mode?
We kind of touched on this when we were talking about our backward compatibility kind of section. I still feel like it's going to be very similar to what Game Boost is doing. So it's not enhancing resolutions. It's not bumping up a game that runs at 720p automatically to 1080. But Nate, I think you're right. You mentioned dynamic resolutions. Games that do have dynamic resolutions that do tend to drop resolutions when there's a lot more things happening on screen. Games like Doom Eternal and Doom 2016, Wolfenstein, those types of games, The Witcher as well, Xenoblade, the Xenoblade games on the Switch, they tend to drop their resolutions. I think all we're really going to get is they're just going to basically lock at whatever the highest resolution is. So if the target was 1080, then hopefully we'll get more 1080. If it's 720, we're going to get 720. Beyond that, I would be surprised unless we get specific game patches, which, as we said, may be a thing that we get as well, but we'll see.
Then had a $5 donation from Watataniac. With the last Switch emulator gone, are fans of emulation doomed to only enjoy games designed for other hardware from the shadows forever? Could general emulators insert any ROM file and it works for all platforms be developed and supported officially?
Well, I do want to mention that even though Yuzu and Ryu Jinx are both, and I'm using air quotes, gone, they still exist. And what I mean by that is because they're open source, there's always going to be people in the community that are continuing to enhance those emulators. And there are still people that are actively working on those emulators right now. Now, whatever that means as far as the future of Switch emulation, I couldn't say. But I just want to clarify that even though Nintendo, yes, did settle to basically remove both of those emulators officially, unofficially, or whatever you want to call it, because it's open source, those emulators still exist. So I wouldn't be too concerned about it. As far as your second question about, I didn't really understand entirely what you were saying. Load in a ROM and it runs anything or something like that. No, I mean, I think all you just have to know is Switch emulators, while they did suffer a pretty significant blow this year, I wouldn't call it a knockout punch at this point.
Yeah, like the second question was, could general emulators for all platforms be developed and supported officially?
No, I don't think that would be anything that it would ever happen. It doesn't seem likely to me.
Then had a dollar donation from Liam Werner. John talked on Spawncast about select PS4 games not working correctly on PS5 and the possibility of Switch games having graphical issues on the next system. Do you think that will happen? And if those issues do pop up, do you think Nintendo will patch them?
I think it really depends. Again, we're talking about backward compatibility, and correct me if I'm wrong, but even hardware-based backward compatibility still wouldn't be 100% backward compatible with everything. There's going to be some edge cases. There's going to be some games that won't work properly or don't work for some reason. So I would expect a very, very high percentage of games that just work, but there's always going to be just that select few. I remember on the PlayStation 5, your favorite game, Mel's Diner, didn't run.
But now it does.
I believe they went back and they fixed it. So I think Nintendo would do the same thing if backward compatibility comes out, and maybe it's a thing that they have to iterate upon to increase the percentage of backward compatible titles. Then I do think that's something that they would do in order to get as close to 100% as possible. So I would expect something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the games that most people will care for or want to play backwards compatible will be there. If a game that isn't compatible or has a minor issue is something along the lines of Ski Sniper, maybe they don't go out of their way. But, the games from Nintendo and from significant third-party partners,
yes,
those games will work fine. It might just be some of the smaller, more obscure indie games that, I shouldn't say this, but I will, games that probably should never have been allowed to release on the eShop to begin with.
Right.
Maybe they will be the ones that could potentially have some sort of issue, like Alarm Clock and Calculator.
Yeah. Agreed. I mean, some of those titles don't really need to be brought forward, and it's just very easy just to say, well, this is the backward compatibility program that we have provided, and by the way, we've just nixed a bunch of titles that aren't going to make it on the new hardware for various reasons. Maybe there's new certification rules around that.
Then our final Streamlabs question comes from Jackie G, donated $1. Sending this a little late, but happy 5th birthday to the channel. Been listening since day one and always enjoyed. Here's to many more.
Appreciate
Thank you.
it, Jackie G. Great to hear those kind words.
And if you liked this episode, give the video a like. If you didn't, give it a dislike. Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below on Nintendo Switch 2 reveal timing, when you think it will take place, and about the possibility of it releasing in late May or June, and if you think that is a good window for a release of new hardware. And thank you for joining us for this episode and bearing with us as we get our podcast legs back underneath us. But I'd like to thank MVG for joining me as always.
Always a pleasure, Nate. It's great to be back. And thanks for the awesome discussion as always.
And we will be back in the very near future with our Game Award predictions episode, which will be available early next week. So we will see you again very soon. And until next time, continue to embrace the hate.
With Nate and MVG, dissecting all the lies. Make the hate rocket hard, MVG dropping knowledge bombs. This podcast sitting strong, guiding us where we belong. Through the pixels and the codes, breaking down what future holds. Nate and MVG showing us the gaming goal.